Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a corrupt company destroyed my inherited property while I was gone and built a mansion on my land instead. I ended up suing them. Here is what happened. The first one starts like this. Large companies are the masters of act first, think never. They do whatever they want and just assume they can get away with it because they can afford better lawyers or people are just scared to fight them. Due to privacy agreements, I cannot say exactly the name of the large company that I was having issues with, so I just have to call them company for this story. My family is spread through 2 different countries, with the older generation staying behind in Colombia, while the newer generation have been born in America. I loved visiting my grandparents in Colombia and being able to stay on their farm. I loved seeing the animals and just having a ton of land to be in without the congestion of a city. They actually at one point had an even larger piece of land but sold some of it off to a company in order to help pay for me to go to college. Company wanted the entire plot of land but it wasn't for sale. Then my grandparents passed away and I was left with the farm and the house. I was in my last year of college and wanted to finish and graduate before I made the trip down there to sort things out. I had no idea what I wanted to do with the land, but I knew I didn't want to sell it. A life without it just would feel like something was missing in the middle of my heart. I wanted to maybe spend money to keep it maintained, and when I traveled to visit other family, I would have it. 4 months later, I graduated from school and gathered all the documents I would need before taking the trip to Colombia to visit what was now my farm. The only thing was, my farm was not there anymore. I mean, the land was still there, but nothing else was. The house that I remember smelling like my grandmother's cooking was gone as if it had never existed. The barn where my grandfather taught me about livestock might as well just have been my imagination. That was not to say the land was empty, instead there was a large building on the land. It was basically a mansion home, and I didn't even process what I was doing until I had already rung the bell and somebody opened the door. Man, hello? Me, hi, I have paperwork here that says this is my land. There used to be a farm here that belonged to my grandparents. Man, that farm was sold 4 years ago to the company. Me, well yes, some of the land was, but this part of the land was left to me in their will. They were living here until about 4 months ago. Man, I don't know what scam you're trying to run, but company president name is a busy man, and I'm not gonna let some random guy off the streets bother him about this. I had the door closed in my face and I was extremely angry. The company had taken advantage of the land being empty and essentially stole the land that they were not able to buy years ago. Then the company president decided to build himself a mansion on the property because he had money and figured he could do anything he wanted. Quite frankly, this area was mostly poor, so if I was actually from here, I wouldn't be able to get any lawyers. My family in America had done very well though, and I did have enough money to get a lawyer and sue the company for stealing my land. The more I thought about how I was thrown aside, the angrier I got and the more I wanted to destroy this guy. It actually took me 3 tries to find a lawyer since the first 2 did not want to go against a big company. This is how they got away with doing whatever they wanted. Being so intimidating that even lawyers didn't want to fight them. I had all the documents regarding the previous land purchase as well as the land documents that were left to me. I ended up actually staying in Colombia for 3 months until this whole thing was sorted out. I had another family that I was able to stay with, which made things a little easier. The company itself seemed to not even care that they were being sued and offered me $20,000 to just walk away from the entire thing. It was an insult to think that I could just be bought by them and give up my land. Land that was worth way more than that, just to let you know. So I declined and insisted that we go to court to get my land back. I didn't want compensation or a payoff, I wanted to hurt them and make them realize that he couldn't always win just because he had money. Things progressed to court and the company president was adamant that he owned that land and I was just trying to file a fake lawsuit in order to gain money. Talking about how the community is poor and desperate, so they go after the only place they see money in order to get some. None of that made sense since again I don't live in the area and just finished getting a degree in organic chemistry. I was not desperate for money like he was claiming. He brought up the deal that was made 4 years ago and had fake paperwork claiming that the land they purchased was all the land that my grandparents had. He just chose to let my grandparents stay squatters through the goodness of his heart, but when they died he made the decision to take over the land that was supposedly rightfully his. Let me tell you, I wanted to punch him in his lying face so badly for trying to come off like some kind of saint. I presented my paperwork that showed the deal was only for a part of the land and not the entire thing. I told the story of how they sold just enough land to help me pay for college, but they never would have sold all of it. I even had documents showing they were paying taxes for the farm during the time that company owner claimed it was his land. I questioned why would they still be paying taxes if they owned it while he was only paying taxes on part of the land. Again, I was offered money as compensation, but I refused to take it. I demanded that he get off my land or be arrested for trespassing and destruction of property. Now that he was in a corner, he tried to bring up a new argument, being the house. That he spent a lot of money on that mansion, and if I wanted to take the land and live in it, I would have to pay him a tidy sum of money. He was not expecting me to say that I didn't care about the house and would agree to let it be demolished if he had an issue with me living in it. After all, he destroyed my house and barn, so it only seemed fair. Speaking of which, while I didn't want compensation for the land, I did want him to pay for all the time illegally using my land and destroying my property. I was asking for $450,000 and actually being granted the full amount. I also said that I didn't want to have to oversee the demolition, and since it was his mess, I wanted him to take care of it all. This was mostly to be petty and making him see his own house crumble at his feet. A lot of people did not think that I was gonna win after not just accepting the money. At times I even thought I might lose it all. I had to try though for my grandparents, and I'm glad that I did, and I got the land back. My cousins are gonna be mostly keeping an eye on it while I'm in the States, charging them nothing to stay on the land's new home that I was having built. The company still exists, but I don't think they will try getting the rest of my farm again. And yeah, Ripe Stars, that's exactly how you should get revenge on people that think they are above the law just because they are rich. Either way, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that would help me tremendously. And without wasting any more time, let's dive right into the next revenge story. This was nearly 10 years ago, and yet I still look back and chuckle. I was working 3 jobs and going to school at night, and he was working part-time for one. While I had cancer, he lost 100 pounds with extreme dieting, eating less than 500 calories a day, because he said that he was sick of me getting all the attention. We were divorced near the end of January, which meant we were married for all of the prior year. We filed for a cheap divorce since we didn't have any shared money, things or children, so nothing was stated on how to file our taxes. In March, he called and said that his tax guy had figured out that if he filed his taxes as single, then he owed over $2,000, and if I filed my taxes single, then I was paid $400. However, if we filed jointly, then we would be paid $450. He offered that if we did so, then he would pay the tax guy for his services and keep the $50 profit. At this point, my dad did my taxes for me for free, so there was absolutely nothing in it for me. I just said no and filed separately that afternoon. Edit, it was pointed out that I didn't clarify his offer. I keep my entitled $400 and he uses the $50 to pay the tax guy. He was hoping, and I quote, that I would do the right thing to keep him from owing money since it didn't hurt me at all to do so. And the next one is another revenge story. So this story is about a fraudster and it starts like this. A few days ago, I was on the unfortunate end of credit card fraud. The fraudsters decided to take my CC info and purchase $1,000 worth of car parts from Philly and have it sent across the border to the city I currently live in, Vancouver, Canada. Normally, this is where the story ends. Sometimes they get away with it, sometimes they don't, but either way, my card is replaced and I continue on living my life. This, however, is where the fun starts happening. I got a call this morning about a DHL shipment entering the country that required customs to be paid. Knowing I haven't shipped anything with DHL in forever, they are the worst, I quickly come to the realization that it must be the fraudsters shipping their goods here. It can't be, I thought. Who in their right mind would use a stolen credit card to order something to their own house in the city the owner of the card lives? After a brief chat with DHL about the customs fees I will not be paying, I managed to obtain the address the package was being sent to. I hummed and hawed about it, but eventually decided the best thing to do was call the local police department and let them know about what was up. I told the officer all about the situation, that unfortunately I didn't know what car the parts were for, and that I hope this info helps them somehow in the future. He tells me that the chances are slim, but he would swing by the house, it's literally 15 minutes from my own, just to see if anything weird is going on and follow up with me if he needs to. I thank him and go on with my workday. About an hour later, I get a call from the same officer, obviously excited. Hey OP, it's Officer X. You will never guess what just happened. I was following up on the report and drove by the house. I decided to go knock on the door just to see if anyone was home and ask them a couple of questions. So then a man opened the door, and as we were talking, DHL drove up to deliver the package. Yes, that's right, the exact package we had been discussing. The delivery driver then walks up to the door and says, "Hi, is OP there?" To which the man replies, "Oh yeah, he's just downstairs." You can imagine my surprise. "That's pretty funny because I just got off the phone with him and I know for a fact that he doesn't live here," I said. The guy, no joke, looks me dead in the face and goes, "Oh, whatever, the package is paid for." I chuckled and turned to the DHL driver to tell him should leave because I need to make an arrest. "I'm calling you while I drive back to the precinct, thought it might brighten your day." I still cannot believe that they caught the guy, but thought it was a story that was too good not to share. And yeah, ripe stars, don't we all love it when scammers and fraudsters get exactly what they deserve? Either way, the next one is a grandpa revenge story, which is of course one of our favorites. This is a story that my grandfather liked to tell. It's kind of long and I cannot say if it's true, but it seems to fit the very old and cantankerous guy I knew who never ever let a grudge go. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, he would sometimes go and yell at Democratic candidates for office because Woodrow Wilson had made him fight in World War I. The story actually starts with that, kind of. You see, Grandpa immigrated to the US early enough that the first election he could vote in, he voted for Teddy Roosevelt. Wilson won though, and then he ran for re-election under the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." Which seemed like a good platform, so my grandpa voted for Wilson. A few months after that, he got us into the war, and a few months after that, my grandfather was in the trenches somewhere in France. He was so mad about that. When he was 104 years old and I was a kid, he was so mad about that he would come to the US to get away from the Tsar, and now that son of a gun Wilson drafted him to fight on the same side as the Tsar. My grandpa made regular donations to the NAACP because Woodrow Wilson was a racist and he hated him. Issues with politics aside, the war itself was not a lot of fun. Grandpa came back with a lot fewer friends than when he had left. First thing after the war was to take all the medals and pins and ribbons and whatever they had given him for that war in a cardboard box. Then he took all that in the box and then he lit the box on fire and dropped the flaming box into the governor's canal. So it was not really a bright point in his life. Also, he came back with a problem with authority in general. As he put it, someone tells you to go run at a machine gun and you do it. Then you get cut up by barbed wire and a machine gun shoots at you and kills half the people who listen to that idiot. It makes you think twice about doing what someone says. For the rest of your life, it makes you think twice about doing what someone says. Which, you know, fair enough, only that attitude made it harder for Grandpa to hold down a job. The 1920s went okay, but then you got the Great Depression, which was not a great time to be a mentally troubled veteran with problems with authority. My grandfather was living in Brownsville, a slum out there in Brooklyn, and he was a junk man. He had a cart which he would take around the neighborhood buying and selling stuff. Picking up stuff that people had thrown out, fixing what he could, collecting scrap metal, and then selling it. Since there wasn't any point in going fast, and since this was not exactly a well-paying profession, the cart was pulled by a horse rather than by a truck. Now, at this point, a few more characters enter the picture. I'm gonna call them McAnally family, even though that wasn't their name. Because they were Catholic boys from Northern Ireland, and because I think that McAnally is a funny name. Jimmy McAnally and his younger brothers Paddy and Joe, it wasn't a particular great time to move to Brooklyn, but it wasn't like Northern Ireland was doing that much better. Also, Jimmy had been involved in the politics of Northern Ireland and had attracted the attention of the local authorities both because of his Republican leanings and because of the way he would set fire to the shops of people who didn't donate sufficiently to the Republican cause. He had also attracted some ire from the Republican side of the aisle as well because of the way he would keep most of the donations that he had collected on their behalf. Now, Brooklyn was the place for him to be because there he had the advantage of having cousins involved in the labor rackets down on the docks and in other activities of that sort. So Jimmy, along with his younger brothers, got themselves a place in Carnarsey right near the edge of Brownsville and settled into their new digs. Because of Jimmy's connections, people let Paddy and Joe get away with whatever they wanted to for fear of getting shot. And Paddy and Joe were the sort of kids who took advantage of that. At the time, Carnarsey was a dismal wasteland. It still is, but there were bars and candy stores and windows to break in Brownsville. Also, there was a junkman's horse they could steal to ride around on at night and leave him abandoned on a street corner, tired and shaking. Well, that was what happened the first 2 times. The third time they broke the horse's leg. Now, I didn't know that horse, but I knew my grandpa, and my grandpa loved that horse. 60 years later, he had a picture of that horse and he could see how much he missed that horse when he looked at that picture. My grandpa liked my grandma, didn't mind my mom and tolerated me, but he loved that horse. And he was the one who found him with the broken leg, and he was the one who had to put the horse out of its misery. He had an easier time talking about the Battle of Sosens than about having to kill his horse. I'm pretty sure that if it wasn't for my mom and my grandma, he would have just gone after those kids and beaten them to death. Patty and Joe didn't even pretend that they weren't the ones that had stolen the horse. He had heard them bragging about it. However, he couldn't. The Great Depression was not a great time for veterans with authority problems, but it was a worse time for widows and orphans or folks whose father or husband was up in Sing Sing waiting to go to the electric chair. So, okay, he also couldn't replace the horse, at least not right away, but he could do some of the same job with a pushcart, and he could keep an eye on the McAnallys and wait for an opportunity. That opportunity came when they were hanging out at a street corner and Mrs. Strauss walked by. Among his many other grudges, my grandfather hated Mrs. Strauss. So he went over to Patty and Joe and started up a conversation. No hard feelings about the horse. Boys will be boys, right? Only, well, some people wouldn't understand. They were not from the neighborhood like Mrs. Strauss there, who had moved uptown and lived in a nice apartment on the east side. You take something from her, why, she would call the police on you just like that. Which meant that he had just told the young McNallys to not do something, which meant that they were gonna do it. Next time Mrs. Strauss came down to Brownsville to visit her family there, Patty and Joe jumped her, knocked her down and took her jewelry. Which was expensive jewelry, by the way, which her son had bought for her. Now, the reason that my grandpa had a grudge against Mrs. Strauss was the way she came down with a nice dress and fancy jewelry and acted like she was better than everyone else. The only reason she had all that was because her son Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss gave it to her. And why should she put on airs considering what her son was doing? Harry Strauss, aka Pep Strauss, aka Pittsburgh Phil, was probably the most prolific hitman in American history. Working under the orders of Lepke Buchhalter and Albert Anastasia, Strauss was the top assassin in Murder Inc. He probably killed somewhere between 100 and 500 people. And those young rapscallions, Patty and Joe McAnally, had just knocked down his mother and stolen the jewelry he had given her. My grandfather was not there when Patty and Joe brought the jewelry to their brother so that he could hawk it for them. But it seems that he didn't entirely approve of what they had done, so once he had figured out what they had done, crapping themselves mightily, the whole McAnally clan effed right off to London, not even stopping to go back home. Which meant that when a well-meaning passerby happened to take all the stuff they had left behind, he found enough money in their house that he could afford to replace his horse and a little extra besides. That is where my grandfather's story ends. I'm sure the McAnallys were all fine, both the IRA and the British probably would have let bygones be bygones, and when World War II rolled around, young men of Patty and Joe's age had all sorts of exciting opportunities both at home and abroad. However, they didn't show up again in Brownsville, and I hope they learned a valuable lesson about stealing a guy's horse and then making him kill it. And yeah, ripe stars, what's the saying? Never mess with a grandpa, especially not a veteran. However, honestly, you have to be absolutely stupid to even try this. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.